Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I am your host, Brian Scott. Today we're going to read some more channelings from Quo. These deal with the question of the shadow, how to balance the shadow side. We've talked a little bit about the shadow on other episodes. Quo holds a unique perspective about the shadow. If you don't know about Quo, check out my previous episodes. They are a collection of higher density beings that channel through a group called LL Research, and they are amazing. We begin with a channeling delivered on January 6th, 2018. Quote, today our group question is about the shadow side. Could you give us a definition of the shadow side, and then help us to understand how we may understand the shadow within ourselves and how we might balance the shadow side? Jim channeling. I am Quo, and we greet each of you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. We thank you for inviting our presence this afternoon in your circle of seeking. It is always a great joy for us to be with you, for we are all brothers and sisters on the same path, moving in unison and harmony towards the one creator, who, though seems to be a distant entity, is within each of us. It is our great joy to be with you and to speak to your concerns this day. We would ask a favor to begin. That is, that you will take those words and concepts which we offer you and use them as you will, leaving behind any that do not feel right to you. We would not be a stumbling block to you, and if you will do us this favor, then we will feel free to share with you that which we have come to share. You ask this day about the dark side, the shadow side of the self, and what it is. Does it have a purpose? And how does one balance it or use it? Is this possible? My friends, this is a most important query. For within the cultures of your planet, there are various mores or customary expectations that are provided as givens, shall we say, that each within the culture must reproduce in some way. And if these cultural mores are ignored or rejected for any reason, then there is the possibility of the entity so ignoring or rejecting a certain concept or quality that it then becomes relegated to the subconscious mind in order that it not be, shall we say, a bother or an irritating reminder to the conscious mind that it indeed exists at all. Various concepts throughout many cultures of your planet may be found in such dark environments, shut away as within a closet, so that the conscious waking self may proceed on its daily round of activities without having to consider these qualities that are somewhat disturbing to it for whatever reason. We find in your particular culture that there are aspects of the sexual life that are relegated to this darkened area within the mind, so that various fantasies then become the leakage, shall we say, that then begin to haunt the conscious mind and distract it from the proper placement of this normal human function within the conscious mind. It was mentioned earlier today that humility had a certain feature for the questioner that would nag at the conscious mind from time to time, reminding it that it had failed to exercise this quality. Other qualities that many have so dismissed could be the qualities of pride, the other side of humility, of self-worth, when the self is seen as insufficient to a task at hand or unable to comprehend the learning necessary to reflect the ability of the self to function as well as any other self. There may be features of certain relationships of parent to child, of sibling to sibling, of friend to neighbor, and so forth, where it is desirable nature of the relationship to express it freely and openly, and yet for some reason, which is perhaps not apparent or visible to the seeker of truth, this relationship has developed certain blockages or diversions of freely expressed energy, thus making clear communication difficult and open-hearted love non-existent. So we would suggest to you, my friends, that the shadow side is that portion of any entity, especially the conscious-seeking entity looking for truth in the life in the path, which cannot be dealt with clearly as a rule and must be relegated to a safe place within the conscious mind, or more likely for those who are not conscious of the seeking path, the subconscious mind. Thus, many of your peoples carry with them what you may call heavy baggage that contains these qualities and concepts which are shunned, either by the culture as a whole or by individuals according to unique personal experience. This baggage tends to weigh heavily upon each entity, for it is that which is not understood, is not handled in a clear and open fashion, so that there might be a fruit produced from the interaction of the entity and the concept. For my friends, as we are sure you know, every experience that you have ever had has the capacity for teaching. Each person can learn a variety of lessons from any concept or quality of human behavior or endeavor. When the mind and heart are open to receiving any information that is available in the daily round of activities in an open manner, then there is a process of learning that is begun, oftentimes within confusion or doubt or disharmony, for these are those processes that, shall we say, grab one's attention and continue to offer the opportunity for balancing the learning within the individual according to the energy centers or chakras that are involved. Each of you has a certain kind of energy body that is related to the various energy centers or chakras. As you move from the red ray of personal survival and sexual reproduction, this very basic quality of experience can be translated to the orange ray, where the individual expression of emotions and idiosyncrasies to one other being is primary in the beginning process of relating and expanding to others. As you move up the energy centers, the expansion continues within the yellow ray, where the individual self is placed in groups, beginning with, in most cases, the family, the neighborhood, the school, the workplace, etc. In each level of experience, there is the opportunity to relate to others, whether individually or in groups, in a manner which offers each seeker the chance to explore whatever catalyst or opportunities for learning have been chosen by it before the incarnation to learn during the incarnation. Thus, when there is baggage of an unknown or unrecognized or unaccepted nature, this baggage becomes as a blockage in each energy center in which it might be expressed or discovered. These three lower energy centers are critical for each seeker of truth to clear, so that the energy of the one creator may move freely through them and begin to open the heart center of universal love and understanding. When this is done, then there is the opportunity for the entity to move from the third density to the fourth density of love and understanding. However, the shadow side of each seeker, having been relegated to the closet, shall we say, at some point finds a way to become noticed, whether it is the nagging of the mind or repeated experiences that lead the seeker to the closet to unlock the door. At some point, each seeker of truth must realize that this shadow side is a good friend and has much to teach, for it is holding in reserve those areas of blockage which, when dealt with clearly, release the energy that is held in place by the blockage, that it might move upward along the line of energy centers and release a certain kind of experiential energy at each level. For you all have planned, previous to this life experience, those lessons which are necessary for you, in your own estimation, to complete in order to become the whole human being that you desire to be, that being which sees all as love, gives and receives freely with each the quality of universal love and acceptance. The effort that you make to uncover those hidden areas within you that can offer you learning to achieve this goal is what is called the process of the polarization of your consciousness. Whereas those who are devoted to seeking and serving other selves, this positive polarization becomes the means by which you might open the heart energy center and release the unconditional love that abides therein. So we would suggest to you that you make friends with your dark side, with your shadow self. Embrace it with open-hearted love. Invite it to share with you those areas which you have ignored in the past, for here is the repository of growth. Here is where you unblock the energies that await release. Here, within the shadow side, you have the grittier, hardier, more substantial part of yourself that has had to fend for itself for quite some time and has developed qualities of perseverance, of endurance, and of desiring to be noticed and utilized as a full and whole partner in your journey of seeking. When this unification of your light side and your dark side can be made within your being, then you have the opportunity of, shall we say, functioning upon all cylinders. This is the reason for the incarnation, for your true home from which you incarnated exemplifies unity, exemplifies the fact that the Creator exists in each entity, full and whole, awaiting discovery from the conscious seeker of truth. Here within your third density illusion, this is the concept that you take on faith, and with enough exercise of your will, can find that it is true for you, and paradoxically the light grows brighter as you're able to absorb and unify and balance and work with the darkness within. It is not an error or a mistake that such darkness exists for a period of what you call time. It is often necessary for some entities to use the dark areas of the mind to store the concepts that it is not ready to deal with. As you become more and more experienced in using the daily round of activities as food for growth, your own spiritual growth and the growth of those around you, then it becomes necessary to find those areas where you have stored that which you then wished to delay working with. Eventually, when you have found each of these areas within your being, then the intelligent energy or the prana of the one Creator can move freely through your energy centers, and eventually you may be able to realize consciously in this incarnation your nature as being the one Creator. First, however, my friends, make friends with your dark side. It is simply another aspect of yourself waiting to share its gifts with you. Question: is shame about aspects of oneself a way of identifying the shadow self or tendencies? I am Quo, and am aware of your query, my brother. Yes, my brother. The quality of shame, or the discouragement from expressing certain features of the self, is a quality which is quite indicative of that area of the dark side or the shadow self, and may be followed as a trail of, shall we say, breadcrumbs to find the heart or the source of such shame, so that it might be balanced and eventually erased, for in truth all is the one Creator, and there is no true shame. Question: it seems there are a variety of ways to work with the shadow side depending on what the blockage is in what particular chakra. Would you say there is one core way to work with the shadow side? That is to say, what is the final end or integration of the shadow side? I am Quo, and am aware of your query, my brother. We look now to the practice that was suggested by those of Ra, for the balancing of all catalyst is that process which can lead to the releasing of the blocked energies within each energy center. So when you would see any quality which you would say was part of your shadow side, then within your meditative state, invite that quality to present itself to you in a manner which reflects its most recent appearance in your consciousness. Look at that experience and make it larger, magnify it until it becomes outrageous, and then for a moment within your mind, in meditation, image the polar opposite. If it be shame, image joy or positivity. However, the shame has been expressed, find its polar opposite and allow that by itself to become as large as the original shame. Then simply accept yourself and love yourself for having both of these qualities within your being as means to teach you love. This is a simple exercise which, when accomplished on a daily basis, may remove those blockages that exist as accentuations of certain qualities that are without balance. Each seeker of truth must realize that it is a being of completeness, that its mind contains all things, and as you discover more and more qualities appearing in your daily round of activities that knock you off your center of love and understanding, then it is necessary to balance each quality with its opposite, the good as well as the bad, shall we say, for the wheel of karma moves through good and bad. Once you are able to balance these qualities, then you are off the wheel of duality, the wheel of karma, and may move forward unimpeded in your expression of the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Question: how may the male adept balance the feminine shadow self? I am Quo, and am aware of your query, my brother. In general, the male is that quality which reaches, is active, and is in motion. The female principle is that quality which awaits the reaching, is more inactive and ready to potentiate, shall we say, as it joins with the male. This may be seen as an expression of the conscious mind, the male relating with the unconscious mind, the male, so that each has a role to play in the evolution of the mind, the body, and the spirit complex. Thus, if in your meditations you can see the quality of the male active and reaching for new experience, and catalyst to process and lessons to learn being potentiated by the female, which has a certain kind of wisdom that is not available to the male, then there is the balance between the two within you, so that you become both. Question: if a seeker has what might be described as an existential pain, an experience of isolation or lack or deprivation, and as a result they seek communion with others in mind and body as a means to speak to this pain, is the seeking of communion with others misguided, and would it be wiser to focus upon self-sufficiency of the self as the creator? I am Quo, and am aware of your query, my brother. We find that a simple and direct answer to this query is not possible, for there are instances in which reach of your alternatives is appropriate. We would recommend that within your meditative state, you look at the existential pain, the moments in which you experience it, the effect upon your mind and your emotions, the effect upon your functioning, the total qualities then of the pain, looking to any possible source within your memory for this pain. Perhaps it is from an early childhood experience. Perhaps you have brought it with you into the incarnation. To answer questions such as these, we would recommend that you use your intuition, that which moves between the conscious and the unconscious minds, and brings back information from the unconscious mind to the conscious mind to direct the activity of thought and behavior. Thus, there may be sometimes when retiring into yourself for self-reflection and illumination from the unconscious mind would be indicated. At other times, it might be that the direction from the intuition would be to move outward into an expression of the self with others, for the purpose of gathering information that can lead to bringing forth this existential pain in a more conscious expression that might be worked with both energetically within the heart and analytically within the mind. Thus, both the experiencing of retiring into the self and the experience of moving into social intermingling can be useful in seeing this pain from all angles. It also might be helpful to keep a journal of these experiments in examining the existential pain, for in such journaling processes, you are also offering intuition an opportunity to express itself through what you might call automatic writing, or the revealing of thoughts moving upward from your subconscious mind into the conscious mind. It is a form of channeling, shall we say, from yourself to yourself. Moving to a channeling delivered on February 10th, 2002. The question today has to do with the concept of the shadow self, the darker side of ourselves that we occasionally explore, but which is mostly a mystery to us. We would like for you to help us discover what it is that we can do to get to know our shadow selves, to accept our darker side, and become 360-degree people with light and dark. What is the most salient thing that we as seekers of truth could do to get to know and accept our shadow selves? We are those known to you as the principle of Quo. Greetings in the love and the light of the one infinite creator. The shadow self is a most interesting query, and to begin, we would bring to your mind a symbol in this instrument's mind labeled pop culture. It is the yin-yang symbol with the S-shaped curve across the circle, with one graceful arch being black and the other white, the black having a white dot and the white having a black dot. Certainly one can see the white from the black. One can see they create a spherical being, and this is the 360-degree being that we have been talking about. In this instrument's communion service, which we present to the one known as C as an example of our sense of humor, the wording of the general confession is to be that of claiming the self to be a wretch, and within this instrument's mind there is often the ironic thought that she regrets that this was ever taken out of the service, because it's helpful from time to time to connect with the wretched portion of self-perceived humanity. For it is the glory and the pain of humanity to express and experience two paths for the price of one. This is a density that is rather unusual even for later densities in the strength of the apparent wide chasm or abyss between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And indeed, there has been a very concerted effort on the part of many to conceive of this as a war, and the light workers of the world as warriors that are fighting dark forces. We do not find this to be the most helpful model from which to view the energies of your planet, as harvest is in the midst of its birthing and processing of so many energies and so very many entities. The temptation is to remain within the spiritual materialisms of fourth density war. This density has never solved the question of war. Indeed, it is incapable of solving the question of the war between good and evil, for it has, by its very definitions, especially in the beginning of it, no balance. It is purely loving. Within third density, there is the opportunity to come to balance, and this is the query that you ask, in effect, when you ask about the shadow self. When one is in balance, one sees and allows the enjoyment of and the preference for the radiation of beauty, the truth, and the very obvious unity of the positive that is around one, of the beauties and the blessings that are thick in the air in daily life, in all sorts of nooks and crannies that are seldom even seen because the creation is so rich in its gifts. And yet, the creation is rich also in challenges, and for each of you within this room, the challenge is in seeing the dark side without its masks, or rather, shall we say, with a more selective, with a more understanding choice of masks for the dark side. For is not the she-wolf a terrible hunter, greatly feared by its prey? And do you not desire to have the she-wolf run with you? She is a murderer. You can think about each and every aspect of the dark side of the self that feels self-pity, the self that feels jealousy, greed, murder, adultery, all of your 10 sins, and we assure you, many more, which are more subtle and lie within the heart. And yet within this same matrix of humanity lies also the tree of the new world. For as you are all things within this density, so are you also things that are not of this density. Therefore, balance becomes a matter of retaining and refining a sense of proportion so that you are able to become a better observer of the self and its behavior. It is difficult to become aware of the self, the thoughts of the self, and what the self is doing. Usually for such intensive work as this, it is helpful to have that entity who is able to see the self from the outside, and so groups such as this one are helpful. Friendships are helpful when there is sharing back and forth, as this instrument and the one known as C have often done, encouraging each other in those truths that they both have an intellectual awareness of, but which they both do not yet grasp with absolute comfort: the cloak, the crown, the scepter. For you see, to come into an acceptance of the she-wolf that runs with you, to come into an acceptance of the liar whose dazzling footsteps dance one out of trouble, to love that self that is able to aim, group at 3 inches, and polish off a target at 20 yards that happens to be a human that is attempting to cause damage to a loved one. This instrument has certainly experienced the feelings of a murderer when a loved one was apparently struck and perhaps killed. There is no length of time between the sight of someone that needs defense in the mind of the perceiver and the feelings of murder. And it is a pure, clean, crisp, and powerful emotion, not unlike anger, but with deadly intent. Would any say that this instrument had an unintegrated murderer within her? No, and yet it is in this instrument's inner thoughts that she does indeed have a murderer alive and well and living in the hospitality of the temple of the body, the mind, and her spirit. And so each contains all there is, and within your density, the very fabric of your illusion is very much the yin and the yang, the give and the take, and it is a great achievement indeed when the dark side of self is seen as an asset by the self, and as that she-wolf bears its fangs and seems to come at one as a werewolf, as a predator, as one that wants to tear out the heart. That is when you embrace that she-wolf and know that it is your powerful, brave heart that is capable of anything, but that chooses to be your she-wolf, to be your totem, to be your seeker of truth that prowls in dreams and comes back with news of elsewhere. All of those aspects of dark side that seem so grimed are actually no grimier than the excrement that passes from the bowels of your body. Is food fair and excrement foul? It may seem so, yet both are necessary, and the intake and the outgo are equally necessary, and the bowel is just as necessary an organ as the tongue. Both are valued equally by the body, and whether dark or seemingly light, both are affected not by the literal nature of their seeming function, but rather of the emotion that powers them. For cell by cell, each of you is powered by an emotion or a mixture of emotions. We urge people over and over again to refine their desires. We urge them to seek the silence and to ask within this silence for the further refining of truth, for the further honing of the desire to know. This is because this is the path that yields to the seeker those abilities to move from the world of black and white into the world of moving energy, energy that passes through all the chakras, moving up and through and out, catalyst moving down and through and out in a majestic mixture of inner planes and outer planes function, in which the human physical vehicle is an inextricable and valuable part of spiritual growth and the great sender of signals of that which is your mind, your body, and your spirit. And the person in charge of sending each signal to the mind, which sends to the body and which shares with the spirit, is that perception that is believed to have occurred. What is that faith which each of you holds, to which each of you can cling? Where are there simple and easy ground rules for improving one's perception of these things? This instrument has found helpful and uses to this day the following prayer: Lord, make us instruments of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, teach us to seek not so much to be loved as to love, to be understood as to understand, to be consoled as to console. For it is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in giving that we receive. And it is in dying that we rise to eternal life. This is a prayer of light and dark, and of the choices that we make in the way we feel. Entities surrounding one shall predictably offer one negative catalyst that is perceived to be negative because it is dealing with other people's projections of one's own dark side, which is another way of saying that you are projections of their dark side, and that all entities are busy demonstrating the humanity of the self to the other self. Each of you is valuable in that regard, if in no other, for all of you are a bad example from time to time, and blessed are the bad examples as well as the good examples. Blessed are those moments when you despair and think, I will never get this problem, because at that point that you realize that there is a bad attitude that is involved here. Blessed is each moment when you are able to pinpoint anything about the thinking process with which you might quarrel, for there are things which can be improved by watching the thoughts one has and the comments that one makes to oneself about those thoughts. There are truly voices within the mind that need to be put into deep memory, into deep storage, into files that are closed, that do not need to remain in the voices that speak in dreams and in the voices that speak within the musings of inner thoughts. The voices that are needed are the voices of silence, not our words, not the words of your parents, not the words of any perceived guardian or authority can give you that which is beyond words, the presence of the one infinite Creator, whose nature is absolute love. The Creator has come through other generations of being and has found ways closer and closer to understand what love is, and yet it remains a mystery. And the Creator is ever curious. Your experiment in positivity and negativity of such sharp characterization is very interesting. The Creator is most curious. We are aware that the challenges of coming into a balanced view of the self in which the self is forgiven are great. The many enculturated energies that tend, society by society, to keep people in their places within the scheme of things, as this instrument would say, are deadening, distorting, numbing, confusing teachings that either consciously must be removed or removed by trauma. In the face of this, the challenges of coming into balance with the self may seem insurmountable, and yet we say to you that there is a moment which is that this instrument was attempting to speak of when she said falling in love with yourself is needed. There is a moment when the horizon opens and one is able to accept responsibility for one's joy, and one comes into a bliss that does not cease entirely. And there is even a bobble in the harmony. It is painful enough that it is necessary to stop and correct the error in each place where the entity perceives the self to be out of balance and stuck, the things that are holding the pattern, which have to do with perception rather than truth, with, as the one known as C stated, inner balances of self in lessons that are being learned rather than the characteristics of the outside world, as it impinges accidentally in a random manner. It is not random. It is kindly producing the general catalyst for the kind of lesson that this instrument desires to learn within this incarnation, And this particular line of thought is one which, more than most spiritual questions, is not harmed by intellectual and analytical thought. Perhaps, if we were to narrow things down to one piece of advice, it would simply be this: check it off and forget it. Whatever it is, if it is something that you genuinely feel that you do not want to do, check it off and forget it. The effect that this has will be the change in catalyst that will inform you as to the preferences which genuinely come into play in various situations. For many times things are other than they seem to be by just a small degree, but as if a house was constructed upon another house, and that first house was buried, and the archaeologist must go down and dig up an entire structure and find out what keeps the energy in this pattern that is not productive. When one is talking about balance, one must talk without making generalities, for no two people have the same balance. Each entity will have a different kind of chakra system, a different way of using it, a different way of expressing it, letting it go and moving it through the body. No two entities are at all alike. They may harmonize and then they are perceived as aura enhancers, or they may tend not to harmonize. Upon the level that balance is achieved without dealing with the light and the dark, what is best is simply to come into loving relationship with the pattern as a whole, so that you celebrate the dirt, the muck, the seeming darkness with honest and sincere appreciation, just as you have appreciation for fertilizers in fields and for the cleanliness of a cleaned out system that would be toxic if one were not able to process food and remove it through the bowels. The perceived darkness of things is negative, and those who honestly believe that the heart is a false creator will attempt again and again to use only the light in order to achieve truth. The problem is, there is no balance in light that does not have love within it. Without love, the light shall always bend itself into service to self. For without the heart, there is no clearinghouse to take what this instrument would call the 90-degree shift from one type of energy to another. And this is what each is attempting to see, that shift in consciousness that is beyond doing well at a perceived task or finding better ways to do tasks. What is actually the benefit and the service of the entity is far below the level, far below what an entity is aware that she is offering. It is in the being of the entity, the way the entity responds in a spontaneous and free manner to the present moment with those with whom she comes into contact, with those of whom she thinks, with those prayers with which she occupies her mind, and with those hopes and dreams that she holds dear and moves to in thought to create places of light in the spirit world. That is the self that entities actually respond to, that they take fire from, and that without knowing why they feel as the light upon the hill that shines forth and radiates in a way that is beyond them and expresses spirit. It is not the entity that is skillful at directing the life. It is the entity who loves in and out of season that is truly serving. So where a balance is an excellent thing to seek, it is not necessarily a goal, because it is yet another thing about which to have a preference. It is yet another trap to lay for oneself to say that if I have balance, if I have equanimity, then I am wise. True balance involves the knowledge that no one knows anything, and that includes the self. Even the one known as St. Paul the Apostle said that I am the least of all Christians. Even arrogance must at last, when speaking upon the level of the soul, own its humility and accept the imperfection of this entire experience. Yet within you also are the inner planes and also the entities who make up this octave. For many there are actual memories of other densities. For others, there is the feeling of being native to earth, but being ready indeed for greener pastures as far as lessons to learn. And the path of service and learning at this time is to a great extent being able to have those moments when you have come into your bliss and you are running with the wolf. And that wolf is your will and your strength that has nothing to do anymore with unbridled or negative darkness, but only with that fecund and energetic power that brings into being the flowers that grant their beauty to a waiting world. We would at this time transfer this contact to the one known as Jim, whom we welcome back to our extensive stable of adequate channels. We are greatly appreciative of the adequacy of this channel and would like to encourage this entity to feel competent. This entity may be aware we are teasing it. In reality, we are jumping with joy, and we want you to know that too. We are very glad to have you as an entity with whom we may share conversation, for greatly do we enjoy being with you and being able to express in your particular style. We move to a more recent channeling delivered in 2019, November 23rd. The question: on the spiritual journey, we often first greet our shadow and learn to recognize it as it subtly appears in our consciousness and lives, and then ultimately come to a place of acceptance of that shadow and a process of beginning to integrate it back into the self in a more harmonious way. Can you give us some advice on how that process of integration of the shadow can be done? I am Quo, and I'm aware of your query, my brother. This is a query which is most salient for each third density entity within this illusion. You are indeed within an illusion in which there seems to be separation of one from another and all from each other, and the path that all travel within this illusion involves the ability to integrate the various portions of the illusion into one's being so that you may become that which you seek, the one infinite creator. However, each of you within the third density illusion goes through what is called the veil of forgetting, so that you forget that you are already that which you seek, and that you have come here to explore more avenues of traveling the path of the one infinite creator to the one infinite creator. As each entity within this illusion enters the illusion and begins at an early age to be taught by those around it, the parents, the siblings, the friends and teachers, and so forth, each of these groupings of entities may have a more or less distorted or undistorted vision of the unity of all creation. And as the teaching process goes on for each young entity or soul within this illusion, there are oftentimes admonitions that are given to the young entity demanding that it not do this or that it not think this or that it not say this or that. Thus there is an accumulation of those admonitions to reserve or to not experience or express various portions of its own being as this beingness comes forth in its evolution into maturity. Thus this evolution becomes tinted, or tainted, shall we say, with that which is put into the shadows of the unconscious or lower levels of the conscious, so that they are not totally dismissed by the young entity, but are held in a kind of reserve, so that from time to time these shadow portions of the self that have been created by the educational process in the young entity make a portion of themselves apparent to the young entity in perhaps an uncontrollable way, so that there is the dispersing of the dark energy, perhaps in anger, perhaps in confusion, perhaps in some way in which the young entity is unaware that its own shadow side is seeking to express itself in a manner which may or may not be consummate with the experience that the young entity is having. As the entity grows into maturity, there is more and more of the addition to the shadow side of the self that the young entity then begins to experience as a mature entity, as that which is not desired, that which is ignored, that which is not successfully represented in all instances. It is necessary for each seeking self to become aware of the shadow side, and aware of not just its existence but its value, for there is a portion of the entity's self contained within the shadow side of the self that can add to the entity's ability to explore more of its own being as a representation of more of the environment in which it lives and moves and has its being. If the conscious seeker of truth then becomes aware of his shadow side, and within the meditative state begins to invite more and more of this shadow self to reveal itself, to invite the shadow self to sit in meditation with it, to sit and explore the true nature of the entire being of this seeking soul and of the creation as a whole, then the maturing conscious seeker of truth begins to be informed in a manner which shows the origins of this shadow side, so that it may be seen to have been blocking various energies of positivity and growth that were attempting to move through the entity as it experienced the catalyst of its daily round of activities. There may be the invitation to the shadow side to begin to reveal itself a little at a time, so that the conscious seeker of truth can see where each portion of the shadow side originated, where there was indeed positivity that was shunned or discouraged, perhaps in areas of sexuality, in areas of individual expression of identity that did not match with the consciousness of those teachers around it, perhaps in areas of originality of creation that were not understood by the teachers of the young entity, so that these areas of creativity were shunned and shunted into the shadow side of the self. Thus, within the meditative state, by inviting these various portions of the shadow side to express themselves to the conscious seeker of truth, this seeker then may discover that within the shadow side there are qualities that are most helpful in the spiritual path. Perhaps there is a toughness, a grittiness that can see one through difficult situations because the shadow side has had to be shunned aside for so long. Perhaps there is a creativity to the shadow side that may aid the spiritual seeker in looking at the daily round of activities and the processing of catalyst of others in a new or novel way that aids the perceptions of the conscious seeker in a manner that allows it to become more and more of the one infinite creator and to see more and more of the one infinite creator in those beings around one, in the environment around one, in every portion of the existence that the spiritual seeker of truth is aware of. Question. Quote, some 21st century scientists are suggesting that Jesus' corpse dematerialized in his tomb. Can you speak on this? Did Jesus' corpse dematerialize in his tomb? I am Quo and am aware of your query, my brother. This is a concept which in general is correct, but in details is somewhat difficult to discuss in your language. However, we shall attempt to speak to this point. As the entity Jesus, who became the Christ, a Son of God, moved through its incarnation, it traveled to many different locations at an early age so that it may explore more and more of the nature of what might be called truth, more and more of the nature of the evolutionary experience that is available to each entity at all times within the third density experience. As it traveled to these various locations, studying with various masters, it became aware that as it was able in its meditative state to enter into a unity with the one infinite creator, whom the entity called the Father, then the entity known as Jesus eventually became able to blend its totality of being with that which is called the Father, or which it saw as love. And as it was able to blend its beingness with the Father, with the creative principle of love, it then became that which it sought, and in many cases, in the recordings of the words of the entity known to you as Jesus, this entity speaks as the Father. The entity speaks not just as the one known as Jesus, although in other locations it spoke as the entity Jesus who had access to becoming the Father. Eventually, as this one known as Jesus was able to commune with the Father, this unity together became union, so that at the time of its crucifixion and burial it was one with the Father, and was able to dissolve one form and take up another, thusly moving after its crucifixion and resurrection into various portions of the third density illusion, being able then to shape itself as it was necessary to serve the purpose of its revealing itself to those disciples and followers of the entity while it was imparted within the third density illusion. Question. Yes, the famous 20th century psychic Edgar Cayce had said that Jesus' corpse had gone into other dimensions. Is that what you're speaking of? I am Quo and am aware of your query, my brother. Yes, indeed. This is what we attempted to speak to as we described the various abilities of the one known as Jesus to enter into communion and then union with the Father, or with that principle it saw as love. This is something it was able to do during the incarnation and also after the incarnation. Question. Jesus became the Christ, it is said, through a process of self-emptying. What role did the disciples play in enabling Jesus to become the Christ? Was the squaring effect any contributor to that? I am Quo and am aware of your query, my brother. The one known as Jesus, as it traveled to distant lands for a great portion of its early life experience, was able to master the ability to create these experiences of unity with the Father, or with the concept of love, the creative principle. As it was able to do this on its own, it then learned that there was a certain kind of technique that it could teach to others that would be a portion of their learning process as they desired to become disciples and were accepted as disciples by the one known as Jesus. This entity then, as it interacted with not only the 12, but many others as well, who were not what you would call primary disciples, but who indeed followed the one known as Jesus in a literal sense, as he moved about the regions of what is now called the Holy Land to share the message of unity, of love and light, and with all those who had ears to hear and hearts to understand. Thus, these entities who followed the one known as Jesus were taught some of the secrets of the seeking of unity with the one infinite Creator. As they were able to, in some degree, learn these secrets and master them to an extent, then this had a kind of resonance effect upon the one known as Jesus, so that by teaching what it knew and receiving from those it taught the learning, it was able to blend more of its beingness with these entities who were the disciples, and also with the one infinite Creator with whom it had become one in certain lengths of time, shall we say, so that from time to time this experience of unity would come into the one known as Jesus, much like a cloak or garment put upon a being to warm it, to enliven it, to enhance its experience of the one infinite Creator. Thusly, There was an intensification of what Jesus had already learned when Jesus then was able to give to those disciples certain portion of those teachings that were able to allow them to do in some measure that which the one known as Jesus had done in completeness. Question. One follow-up quote, it is said that the secret teaching that Jesus conveyed to his disciples was Kriya Yoga. Is that correct? I am quote, and am aware of your query, my brother. In general, this is mostly correct, although at that time it was not described as that particular type of yoga. However, many other entities throughout the history succeeding from the times of the one known as Jesus have found this particular type of yoga in their own experience or in the experience of others who became their teachers who had learned of this type of yoga in a what you might call trickle-down fashion from others, so that there was some alterations or changes made to this type of yoga that eventually has evolved into that which you now know as Kriya Yoga. Question. Can Quo articulate the purest technique or the technique used by Christ to achieve self-realization? I am Quo, and am aware of your query, my brother. We find that there is not in our awareness the sound vibration complexes that are available to correctly imbue this type of yoga with the purity with which the one known as Jesus practiced it. We can only suggest that this type of yoga is that which seeks to be able to use the breath as that which is most salient in the practice of this yoga, so that the breath is utilized in a sense which allows the activation of all the energy centers in seriatim fashion, one after the other, so that eventually both the indigo and violet centers may be activated to the extent that there is a union for the time of the practice of the yoga of the practitioner and the one infinite creator. Thus, this type of yoga is that which is true union with the one. Question. Quo, the famous 20th century psychic Edgar Cayce once said that there is a fine line between being an angel and being a devil, and the desired task of a soul is to get itself psychologically precisely into the divine middle, that anything to the left or anything to the right is off the divine middle, and therefore not of the divine. Can you speak of this? I am Quo, and am aware of your query, my brother. We would suggest that this type of envisioning of the path to the one infinite creator is a valid path. However, there may be times during which the seeker of truth begins to express more and more of the positive or light-filled path than the darker or receptive path. There is the opportunity to express both that which is radiant and that which is absorbent in each instance of the seeker's truth-seeking of the one infinite creator. We would suggest that as the seeker of truth travels this path, it is most helpful to seek first to become that which is radiant, that which is positive, that which is unity with all of the creation, for this allows the further experience of the entirety of the creation to become available to the seeker of truth. The seeker of truth which has mastered the positive path may then begin to experience and express that which is absorbent, so that it pursues what seems to be a negative path, but is that which is exploring the light within the darkness to discover that the darkness does not overcome the light. If the negative path is that which is first expressed and experienced, there comes a time much further along the seeker of truth's path of seeking, during which this experience of the light and the dark is available, that is within the sixth density of the illusion of the one infinite creator, where it is discovered by the negatively oriented entities that have attempted to absorb all about them, all the power about them, in order to control those about them, can go no further until they see that all they control is the one infinite creator seen as the self, and the self is not just as the individual self, but the self of all other beings which have been controlled or attempted to be controlled by the path of the seeker of negative wisdom. Thus we suggest to each seeker of the truth that the positive path is the path that is most easily followed and offers the least distortion to the seeker of truth. Question. Quo, you've probably spoken to this before, and it's always good to get another perspective. If an entity is serving others because it feels good to them, and they get a sense of satisfaction out of it, is this still polarizing positively? And if it is it less pure than serving others, not because of self-satisfaction, but strictly out of dedication to the path of service to others? I am Quo, and I'm aware of your query, my brother. We find this to be a very interesting query, because in each seeker of truth's beginning path upon the positive path, there is the desire to serve others, as you have mentioned, because the seeker realizes that is the way that it shall progress most effectively upon this path. Thus, it would seem to an objective observer that such a path of positivity would be somewhat service to self, for the seeker is doing that which it feels will advance itself in its own path most readily, most appropriately, and most speedily. However, we would suggest that these are the first baby steps taken by the positive seeker of truth. These baby steps will eventually evolve so that there will be no thought given to the service to others as it is given by the positive seeker. When the seeker of truth then is able to spontaneously, without giving thought to the reason for seeking and serving others, serves them because it is the most spontaneous and unplanned path of seeking to serve others. Therefore, it is the spontaneity that determines whether the seeker upon the positive path is truly serving others, because that is what it is doing as a form of what we would call muscle memory or spiritual muscle memory, and not the conscious mind determining the path of the seeker of truth. Question. Quote, the famous 20th century psychic Edgar Cayce once said that each soul or a soul incarnates into matter to learn greater spiritual lessons, and thus that living earthly lifetimes are initiations into becoming more attuned into the divine. Can you speak on this? I am Quo, and am aware of your query, my brother. Indeed, we find the one known as Edgar was quite well informed by his ability to penetrate the hall of records and to discern from these records of the evolution of humanity upon planet Earth. He saw that the incarnations available within third density illusion beyond the veil of forgetting were an opportunity not only within each incarnation to become transformed or initiated, or to become more and more one with the infinite creator, but that each moment, each day, each observation by the seeker of truth had the ability to transform the entity in a manner similar to that of initiation, as the seeker of truth becomes more and more aware of the journey of the seeking of the one infinite creator within itself and within all of creation. It discovers that there is the chance to become that which it seeks in every moment of its existence if its point of view is broad enough, and travels down the road of its consciousness and to the heights of its beingness, so that it is able to perceive in a manner which is enhanced and imbued with the love and the light of the one, which it seeks with every fiber of its being in every daily round of activities, so that all becomes the oneness for such a being, becomes the Christed experience for such a being. At some point, this type of desire to seek the one in all gains a kind of spiritual momentum and reveals to the mind, body, and spirit complex that it is indeed that which it seeks, and this realization or illumination then becomes to be manifested more and more fully, so that illumination becomes communion, and communion becomes union with all there is. We are those known to you as Quo. We are most grateful, my friends, as always, to have had the opportunity to join you in your circle of seeking this day. As we illumine you, you illumine us, for you do that which we find is most honorable and difficult. You move within the third density illusion with the desire to seek that which is not apparent in any portion of the illusion, and which yet inhabits and is each portion of the one infinite creator. You are brave and valued souls. We bow to you in honor and in joy, and we leave you in love and in light. We are known to you as those of Quo, Adonai, Vasu, Boragas. So what we get from these three different channelings is an integrated idea of how to deal with the shadow side. There is a portion of us that we push down into our subconscious because we can't deal with it. As is explained here, some of it comes from teachings that were given when we're younger. You shouldn't do that, you can't do that, that's wrong. And we have these things come up that we don't address, and we don't necessarily get rid of them. And so they end up coming out in times where it seems we don't have any conscious control of it. We'll get angry for no reason, like, I'm not an angry person, why am I suddenly angry right now? And that's the shadow side coming through. Or in some cases, it could be sexual. Suddenly you're making sexual overtures that come out of nowhere, and it's from some deep desire that you have that has been hidden and not dealt with properly. What they're saying is not to be afraid of this shadow side, that it is a part of you and that you can integrate it into your being, and that there are talents and abilities that the shadow side offers you that gives you greater strength and ability to maneuver through this density if you can make amends to it and understand it and resolve it. The best thing to resolve the shadow side is the lesson and exercise that Ra gives in the Ra material that has been emphasized by Quo numerous times. And remember, Ra is part of Quo. The idea is the balancing technique. At the end of the day, you go through your thoughts for the day and you analyze the emotions that came up. And then you try to analyze the opposite of the emotion. So if you had super great joy, you analyze the opposite of that emotion. If you had super intense anger, then you bring up the emotion. Now, the way that they would describe it is that you bring it up in your body as a feeling. And you, by analyzing the opposites of these emotions, you become more whole and you bring these things out into the light. As we have found, one of the great quotes I love from my interview with Paul Selig was, if you leave the dead body in the basement, it's going to start to smell. And it's the same thing for stuff that we are dealing with. If you leave something that you haven't dealt with, it's going to come up again. You have to bring it up. You can't ignore it. The ignoring part is what creates this shadow side. The subconscious is amazing, and some of this stuff goes all the way back to our childhoods. There's parts of our shadow side that we're simply not aware of and are so subtle, and it's an ongoing process. But the biggest thing to learn is if you suddenly start acting unusually out of the blue and you don't know why, that's when you can step back and go into a meditative state and analyze the focus of these reactions, what the locus of them, what the cause of them, and you can start to see the underlying fertile ground where these things come up. They're available to you. And the more that you do this inner seeking, the more strength that you'll have to go about serving others later, because sometimes the shadow can come out and actually hinder your ability to serve and move upon your spiritual path. Also, side note, I was really interested in their discussion of Jesus and that his body moved into a different dimension. Obviously, Jesus learned some interesting techniques along the way, and I was super fascinated to learn that he was teaching Kriya Yoga, or a version of it. The same sort of yoga that Sadhguru teaches. The amazing thing I've learned from Kriya Yoga is that it really deals with awakening parts of your body that you're not aware of. It unlocks emotions that you have in your body, and I just find that fascinating. If there's any parts of this channeling that you were interested in, please put it down. The discussions of Edgar Cayce were interesting as well. There's so much to pull from this, and there's so much to learn every time we listen to the words of Quo. You can find all episodes of the Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. I'm sending love and light to everyone that's listening. I hope you have a fantastic day, and welcome to the Reality Revolution.